Okay. Ucharan along with me. Om
Om
Smitriyam
Smitriyana Apa Oshadaya Santu
Durmitriyam
Durmitriyastasmai Santu
Yo
Yo
Asman
Asman Dreshtiyam Cha Vayam Drishmah. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Okay, now you can mute. But we have to do the recap. So you have to stay on. Any problems from last time?
No.
All good. Okay. Okay, so who's taking up the first one? Astyatma Nastitva Sadhana Bhavat.
Can I take it up?
Please.
This one says that this one tries other arguments to prove that soul does exist. And the fact that it exists prove that it cannot be non-existent. For that he gives many examples, like there are many people, those who don't believe say that, well, you can't see it, but well, that way we have other examples where we can't see it. Center of gravity, things like center of gravity, like that there are many examples. So the thing is, when the body is alive, the consciousness is also alive, but when the body is gone, I mean when the person is dead, there is no consciousness itself, means that soul does exist.
Right. Right.
Sorry, I switched. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, then next one, Dehadi Vyatirikto So Vachitriyat. Who wants to take it up?
So here he is saying that soul is definitely separate from the body, and of course with the mind, intellect, etc. also. I think that is what he is trying to again emphasize here, and saying that soul does not have the gunas, and all the gunas are only related to body, because body is body is the matter, and matter has the gunas and soul does not have the gunas, and your buddhi also is with the gunas only, is so that because of that that uniqueness of soul can be seen, is what he says.
So could you get that idea of how consciousness is not does not have the three gunas? Was that little clear to you?
Yeah, at a higher level, definitely I understood why the soul does not have the gunas, and I mean when we observe everything and how inanimate matter behaves versus how yeah, you can kind of make out why soul does not have this tainting versus taint, because we also see each one being different also, right? So I think
there was some explanation I gave in my
can I?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think this is where we said that just the awareness does not have any color to it. It's like
correct.
It's like I think previously we discussed, when somebody does a scientific experiment for the seeking of knowledge, then it doesn't, you don't see the result of whether it's good or bad. Then when you start attributing like who's going to profit out of it and something like that, then all the other gunas actually start coming into picture over there.
Correct. Just like the splitting of the atom was by itself not bad, but creation of the atom bomb became bad. So like that, yes, correct.
Here is an assumption that consciousness never dies. Is that right?
Yes.
That's an assumption.
No.
It is because
in the first chapter he had proven it, that why we have to consider the soul as a separate entity and something which does not merge into Brahma. That also we saw in the last chapter, the 5th chapter as well. Why we have to look upon the soul as eternal, and why not a part of something else to which it returns or anything
it
like
may
that.
not be a part of the body, but it can die along with the body.
Yeah.
Since it lives in the body, it can die with the body unless it is an axiomatic statement that consciousness has no birth, no death.
Number one is that what he's saying in this Astyatma Nastitva Sadhana Bhavat is to say that you can see something which is different from the body. So that is number one. Otherwise, what you are saying could also be fulfilled by consciousness emerging out of matter itself. Because if it is dying along with the body, it can be matter itself. Why does it have to be a separate entity at all? Right? So first we have to tackle the question of, is it a separate entity? Then we can talk about its attributes. So when we consider is it a separate entity or not, Kapila had given positive proofs in chapter 1. Now here he took up in this Astyatma Nastitva, etc., that if today I assert that there is a soul, there is no way that you can counter me. So firstly, you don't have any proofs to counter the non-existence of a soul. Then also in this sutra, he's saying dehadi vyatirikto so vechitriyat. He's saying that consciousness has attributes which are different from those of the body and the mind. So that is why we are forced to believe that it is different. Then we can look at the question of whether the soul is eternal or not, for which there are other arguments given in chapter 1, but what I can also tell you is separately that if we have to believe that God is fair, which again was a question which was tackled in the last chapter, beginning itself, when we considered what kind of a God is there. So it was finally we came to the conclusion that it has to be a God who is fair. So when we attribute fairness to the God, then how do we explain that one person is born poor or sick, and one person is born rich and healthy? So those disparities which exist in this world, forget about humans, if we look at different organisms as well, these disparities which exist, how do we explain them? It would become unfair on the part of God to make one soul which is an earthworm and one soul which is a king. So to explain that, we have this theory of karma. Otherwise we have to look at a God who behaves randomly, who assigns anything to anything, and the world is just going on. It is as if God in fact need not be present at all, because things are just happening on their own.
The other thing that kind of internally, for me at least experientially, not that of course the true experience would be to become a yogi and have direct experience of the soul, but even otherwise, we if we were mere soulless animals, okay, just to assume that, okay, then we wouldn't have striven to achieve anything beyond the survival needs, really, right? So the fact that we kind of go beyond survival needs, and some animals too, especially the higher animals, do also depict a similar tendency. Seems to tell me that there is a striving in us which outlives the body.
Exactly.
That is the only reason we would strive. If it didn't outlive, why we would strive? So that tells me that there is something longer than the body.
And in fact, in the last chapter, as we saw, that striving for moksha also exists inside us. So some of us who have become little more elevated, we even want to achieve moksha. So that is an absolutely absurd desire, because if we are just body, why should we look for something different? Tomorrow, if we are able to get a robot with some level of consciousness, why will the robot want to leave its body at all, be free of its body? We should be knowing that our consciousness is because of our body. So we should not be wanting to exit the body. So these are the various indications. Mr. Chandan, please go over chapter 1 and even the last chapter, and you will see a lot of proofs which Kapila has given regarding the soul and its eternality. Okay, then Shashti Vyapadeshadapi.
Shall I take it?
Please.
Okay. Here the Kapila says the soul and body is absolutely separate. They are not together. Because he gives the example and saying that the body, when something I possess, is basically the possessive case is being applied here. Yes. And they say, this is my book, that is this is this, we say that thing. That means there is something other than the body exists. That could be the soul or whatever be the thing, the possessor and possessed. That's what he was explaining. And in the next, that is he was saying that, like my car, my leg, my thing. That means someone is there which is aware of it, this body, this thing belongs to. So that's what exactly says that in this one.
Right.
Shashti Pradesh api.
Correct. Na Shila Putravat Dharmik Rahaka Man Badhat.
I would like to take this up because I was reflecting on the Shilaputra word. Last time also I had brought up a reference. Actually, if I take the meaning of Shilaputra in the sense of a normal grindstone, a wonderful analogy emerges, which completely, of course, aligns with how this has been interpreted by you too. There is no contradiction at all. For example, a Shilaputra or a grindstone, as it is known as in Sanskritam, has cannot say that this stone belongs to me and I am something else. The Shilaputra is the stone and stone is Shilaputra. There is no deviation, right? That is very clearly understood commonly by all of us, that it's like a soulless entity. But at the same time, as human beings, we also attribute certain soulful nature to a Shilaputra like lingam, which there we say that there is Shiva, and Shiva clearly says this stone in which I reside is not me, it is just a stone. So there is a separation of Shiva as the ultimate Paramatma soul with the very, very Laukika Shila. So that is the distinction between a Shilaputra and a Shivalinga. A Shivalinga, which we consider, for example, our body as the Linga, as the Sharira Matra, whereas the soul is the Shiva in us. That's how I see this description.
Good.
But Shiva can be our perception, whereas Shilaputra may be a stone. So Shiva does not exist in the linga; it exists in us. So it is our own perception.
Correct.
Yeah, but for everyone who believes in that linga, there is a Shiva residing in that. See, that sense I'm taking. I know for not everyone in the world, but for a good set of people who believe in a particular temple, a linga, that's true. That way I symbolized it. That's
all. Okay, so that is an extension of the sutra, I would say.
Uttira,
yes.
The matter does not have the consciousness. The chit is not there. That's why cannot separate the two self for Abhyayi and Abhyaya and all. The body, when the consciousness goes away, the body becomes absolutely the matter. The consciousness goes away, the body becomes the matter. At that time, the possessor is not there. He has already left. So that's what I think in the Shilaputra is mean, that all the matter, the Prakriti, there is no consciousness, but even the human being and the beings, only they have the consciousness and they can see that something is residing in them.
Right.
This is understanding is.
Correct. Correct. So that's turned out to be an interesting sutra. Let us take the next one. Atyanta dukha nivritya krita krityata. This is easy. No problem here.
Yeah.
We have done it.
You attain mukti by extreme destruction of all the dukkhas.
Yes.
And when you've done this, you have achieved what you set out to do.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. So then, yatha dukhat kleshaha purushasya na tatha sukhad apilashaha. Again, simple.
Should I do that also? Should I do that?
Yes, do that.
Yeah. He says that sorrows, the hurt, the effect of sorrows or the extent sorrows can affect your soul is far greater than what the greatest happiness, the effect of greatest happiness on you.
Exactly.
Like there is nothing to define the opposite of depression, like you said, you know, like depression is like down in the dumps of sorrows, whereas there is no equivalent to in happiness to this.
Right.
So you cannot define a height of happiness, whereas you can sink greatly into sorrow.
Correct. We don't have a disease for excessive happiness.
Yeah.
Okay. So kutrapi kopi sukhi iti. That is almost a continuation of the previous one.
You want me to take it?
Sure.
Okay. Here the shloka in this one, the Kapila says that no one in this world is happy. All of us are always in a dukkha. But when the happiness also comes, there some a tinge of unhappiness is there, because we always worry, oh my goodness, this happiness which is right now I'm enjoying, and that will also go away. It is always the happiness comes in a fleetingly and goes away. But whereas dukkha is always we see everywhere, and the magnitude of dukkha is more than. I remember one. It brings me a small anecdote of Buddha. And one lady comes to Bhagwan Buddha and says that my son is died, and please somehow you bring him back to life.
Yes, I know. Recognize
then the Buddha says, okay, you go all around house, you see, find out anybody had died or not. Correct. Then he says, and she comes back, and so that. So similarly, dukkha is all prevailing. That's why in the first chapter, very first sloka says, dukkha nivritti.
Yeah.
We need to do that.
Correct. So tadapi dukkha shabalamiti dukkha pakshe nikshipante vivechaka. So approximately it is covered in the previous two sutras. I will quickly move on. Sukha labha bhava the purusharthatvam iti chenna dve vidyat. Chenna dve vidyat. Somebody can take this up.
Hi, can I?
Yes, please.
So then the question is that if there is no sukha, if I can't get any happiness, then should I even try? And that's where they say that there are two types of sukha. One is the bhautik sukha, for which you have to have some effort, but the other one is the moksha, where you have to do intense effort. And both are good to strive for. I mean, there is a sukha in that.
Yeah, correct. So nirgunatvam atmano asangatvadi shruteha. Who wants to take that up?
Basically, he had already talked about this nirgunatva in the very first reference itself. So basically, he is kind of also giving Shruti Pramana to that, saying even this is what saying. Because we see, the thing is, Sankhya though has different opinion about separation of soul, God, existence, etc., has 100% belief in the seer's words, because those are achieved through yoga marga, and so the Shruti Vakya is parama for it. So it says Atma has been seen and been told about, so it is nirguna. Simple, like that. It's stating here.
No, that is not the reason for the statement there. Nirgunatva matmano asangatvadi shrutehe. Anybody else wants to take it up?
Yeah, he says that the soul does not stick to matter at all.
Yes.
So this soul does not have any guna because of that.
Correct.
Because it's matter that has the
sattana. The implication here is that when you are in the mukti state, what is left unsaid here is that when you are in the mukti state, then you are devoid of all these gunas. See, nirgunatvam we have already seen. So here he is saying that as the soul becomes completely asanga, already it is asanga as we have seen, just that synapse is there. But in the state of mukti, it is completely free and completely devoid of this nirgunatva which is imposed on it by the body. So it is on its own, and that is when it really enjoys bliss. That is the implication here. That is how it is within that context. Okay, so next one is similar. Para dharmatvepi tat siddhi avivekat.
So because the previous one we said that because it is not attached, during at the time of mukti, it does not have any gunas. It's not feeling. Then why are we feeling all these sorrows or happinesses? That is because in our avivek, our soul is actually thinking that it's matter or it's connected to matter, connected to the body per se.
Yes, correct. Okay, any issues?
Yeah, Uttara.
So
yes.
that means in the Kapila's opinion, the soul is indeed touched by the bhautika sukha dukkha.
To the extent that you start reflecting it, it is you can see it as a mirror as well. Just like a mirror doesn't touch you, and yet it reflects you. So similarly, you reflect the experiences of the body. So while the pain is in your neurons, yet the soul experiences it as if it is happening to itself. That is the distinction.
Okay, because why I particularly asked this, because the distinction of the two types of happiness is very clear. If we clearly say, okay, saguna matter has this normal laukika sukha dukkha, and nirguna atma has a different type of bliss that cannot be associated with this ordinary happiness. And
that is what he is saying here. He is just saying it in a different format. That's all. So that is why you are feeling as if he hasn't said it, but he has already said so many times before. So he is putting it in a slightly different way. That's all. But the meaning is that.
Okay. Okay, that means the bliss is the true experience of soul, whereas this normal laukika sukha dukkha is a reflection, but not a
yes.
direct experience.
Correct. And it is something which is not its own nature. So when you are, say, if I had to experience your nature, then it would be a stress on me. It would not be something which I would like. So same thing is true for the soul.
Yeah, that is a bondage feeling. Yeah.
Exactly. So that is why it is such an exhilaration to even in samadhi to be with just yourself. Yes, Kala, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Uttara, in your notes you've given the wise go in for the higher goal.
Mm-hmm.
The lesser mortals are satisfied with the worldly goal, but both are worth it. So, is the worldly goal worth it?
Yes.
No, by this you mean just experiencing the pleasures here, or?
Yeah, experiencing the pleasures of the world is also not a bad goal at all. Within the world also, there's so many people who go in for higher goals, even worldly goals. You can have a little higher goal than just this. You want to be an entrepreneur and have an industry which is a multinational and which affects the lives of so many people. That is a better goal than just living your life inside your cocoon. So like that, we have this gradation even in the world, right? that thieves' way of enjoying life is not as good as say a leader's way of enjoying life, the prime minister or president of a country. So like that, even in the world there is a gradation, and other than adharmic and illegal things, all goals are good. So God has blessed us with our capacities, and according to our capacity, when we achieve little more than what our capacity was, we strive hard to increase our capacity and work towards achieving more, then that is a good way to spend your life.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay.
That was a very good review, Uttaraji. We enjoyed.
Yes.
This to get into the moksha and all, what propels us? Our buddhi propels us to or motivates us to achieve towards the to reach the what you say, moksha, or the soul itself tries it?
The soul itself drives it, because the buddhi is all the time wanting to catch you.
So what is that?
That is the soul's desire. If you are feeling inside yourself a little desire to experience moksha, then that is the soul's desire.
Again about the buddhi and the man, no, but not of the soul. Soul has nothing to do. Soul just sees that it stays there, and everything is reflected on the soul by the buddhi and all. But what is that which propels at the dukkha nivritti also?
Yeah, as I told you before, desire, as we understand, is not always worldly in its nature. So a desire for knowledge and desire for moksha and desire to know God is not a worldly desire. It is the soul's desire. So don't equate it with rag and dvesha. Rag and dvesh is only for worldly things which are generated through your body and mind. So that is actually linked completely to your body, and it is not you. Other things are not the same. Okay, so let us start on this. We just have 5 minutes left. We will suddenly break up. Please log in again after that. So now that we considered aviveka at this point, paradharmatvepi tat siddhi avivekat, we just did. So now Kapila moves into describing aviveka. So he says, Anadir aviveko anyatha dosha dvaya prasakteha. So here I am going to take a huge diversion from what has been given in the commentaries, because they have taken all these statements as those of Kapila, while I think some of the statements are those of the Purva Pakshi, because there is contradiction between the statements, and the commentators have tried to cover up the difficulty which is arising because of that contradiction. So I will tell you a little bit about where the contradiction lies and why I am saying what I am saying. So here, this I have taken as the Purva Pakshi statement, who says that aviveka has to be anadi, without a beginning, because otherwise there will be two problems which will arise. Okay, so what are those two problems? So the first problem is that let us say it is with a beginning. Okay, so we consider the opposite of that it is sadi. It is with a beginning and it is not anadi. So if it is with a beginning, then how did it begin? We will need to give the cause then of how aviveka arose. So one reason you could say is that the karma which you do puts in some sanskara, which is essentially your aviveka. So therefore karma leads to aviveka. Karma is a cause of aviveka. then the problem comes in that we say that it is karma because it is a deed done with aviveka. Okay, so that is one problem. Then you can say, okay, it arises because one takes birth. Okay, so now again that birth itself happens because of aviveka, and the yoni which you are born in from top to bottom is dependent on how much aviveka you gathered in your previous birth. So again the birth itself is caused by aviveka. So again we run into a chicken and egg situation. So this is the first dosha. Then the second dosh which he says is that if this viveka and aviveka are opposites, then one cannot be replaced by the other. If you are saying it is aviveka is with a beginning, then we have to presume that before that there was viveka. Then how did that viveka get changed into aviveka? Obviously vivek cannot change into aviveka, and aviveka cannot change into viveka. Therefore we cannot explain the beginning of aviveka, the arising of aviveka. Therefore it must be without a beginning. So this is the Purva Pakshi's argument. I think we will log out now and log into the next session. Okay.